You're listening to The Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham. This hour, we're going to discuss the internal journey of a former Detroit homicide detective. After decades of working within the criminal justice system, he is now a critic of the work he once did and the system as a whole. A quick note before we start. Today's conversation may include references to violence and drug use. We recognize these topics can be difficult, especially for those with lived experience. So please listen at your own pace and take care of yourself. Khary Mason is a multidisciplinary artist from Detroit. He has spent much of his life living in a state of cognitive dissonance. For over 20 years, Khary worked in the Detroit Police Department and eventually became a detective for the city's homicide unit. Looking back 6 years after leaving the department, he considers those training years a form of indoctrination. He sees the work of protecting and serving communities as a means of controlling them. He illustrates these reflections in his new exhibition, Friendly Fire, Scenes of Service, Searching for Safety. It is on display now at Irwin House Detroit through March 15th. Khary Mason, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me, Tia.
Of course. So one noticeable concept in your work is safety or protection. It shows up a lot. The exhibition is informed by your time as a police officer, but also your childhood. So I want to start there. Did you feel safe growing up?
Okay, right. We're getting right into it. Right on. So up until I was 7 years old, I felt super safe. My community was a rainbow. It was white, it was black, it was Polish, it was Asian. Everybody could talk to everybody else's children and admonish them. But about 7 years old, I heard a noise in the basement, and for some reason I thought I was by myself at home. And I wasn't. I went into the basement and I saw the first man that I ever loved trying to kill the first woman that I ever loved. And shortly after that, my mother would spirit my brother, my sister, and I away in broad daylight. And she carried these black garbage bags, and they were filled with clothes and documents. But also in the garbage bags was the rage of my father. And I know she didn't mean to pack it, and it got passed on to me. I was told that I was the man of the house. And up until that point, one of the only examples that I had tried to kill my mother. I was a violent child. And many of my neighbors were extremely violent. They grew up the same way that I did. Their father wasn't around. They were filled with rage. When we came outside, our rage met and it exploded. And that was happening all over the city and across the country. When my mom spirited us away, we ended up in latchkey programs, which were great because we got exposed to resources that we wouldn't otherwise see in a home that didn't have two incomes. And one of the things that would happen is we'd be in front of the TV. And I gravitated towards shows with superheroes and the police. And many people don't think of the Andy Griffith Show as a police show.
Oh.
They think of it as a comedy.
Exactly.
It is a police show. I've absorbed any police show, movie, military film, or intelligence-centric production that's been created within the last 60 years.
So the young Khary, what was he fascinated about, or what was he drawn to within those portrayals of police officers in the media?
You know, what's funny is when I walked in on my dad trying to kill my mom, she asked me to help her. And so I ran up the steps to call the police, and he snatched the phone out of my hand. And from that moment on, whenever somebody was in trouble, if I was around, I didn't have to think about it, right? I just dove in. And so I think that something in those shows tapped into that. When my classmates and I were 12 years old, we were at Ludington Middle School on the playfield, and we didn't know it, but there's a federal informant walking by. He's carrying a baby, and he was going to the bus stop to catch the bus to the federal courthouse to testify against his buddies, and he got executed in front of us. By the time I turned 14, I had met my wife, and she continued the job that my mom could no longer do. She saved me from the street. She said, you can go with your boys or you can come with me. By the time we were 20, she was pregnant with our first child. She walked in the door and said, what do you think about being the police? Because the Detroit Police Department is hiring. And by August of 98, I graduated the police academy. I was in my first roll call at the 9th Precinct, and a sergeant addressed between 25 and 50 of us. And this sergeant said a phrase that I'll never forget. He said, the more arrests you make, the safer society becomes. Now, there were some rookies in the crowd, but there were a lot of veterans. And none of those veterans told us that that was a lie. That was the battery in my backpack that allowed me to arrest thousands of people that looked like me. And nothing changed. Over the decades, we would visit the same neighborhoods, the same houses, the same blocks, the same families. The only thing that changed was the generations. And I began to realize, after listening to my wife for many years, that we were being used to accelerate gentrification through a legal framework of incarceration and harassment. And I was suffering a moral injury because of it.
Now, Khary, we want to go back to being a young man. You're 12 years old. You're in the Ludington field. You see this broad daylight execution happen. At that moment, even then, were you thinking, I'm going to be a police officer one day to stop these things from happening in my neighborhood?
It didn't happen then. It was gradually. So it went from what I saw on television to safety patrol to Boy Scouts to, right? Imagine, why would you need a child to help parents and children cross the street, right? Parents can cross the street by themselves. But it was a part of that indoctrination into what an American citizen is, what it means to have more citizenship, more freedom. When you put on a uniform and a badge, you get treated better, right? Subconsciously, we understand that. We might not know that it's playing in the foreground, but we do recognize that those with a badge and a uniform, in many cases, get treated better, right?
And they matter, and they hold a certain status within our society and our community when we see those badges.
Well, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
But nobody tells you the history of American policing, and that it is derived from the practices of the Indian constables and the slave patrols, and that it is designed to protect privilege and power while controlling those who lack access. They don't explain that to you, right? You have to find that.
Now, Khary, you talked a little bit, of course, about policing and in the indoctrination that starts so early on, and you've laid it out pretty clearly for us there. But you mentioned safety patrol, which I was a part of the safety patrol. I was proudly a part of the safety patrol. And then also the Boy Scouts. You know, when we think about those early touch points that we all have with policing and law and order, how does it start to break us apart within our own societies and our own little silos?
So, can you ask that a different way?
It's okay. So when we're starting to see this, especially when we're young people, we're starting to see the safety patrol pop up and Boy Scouts and other ways that we're starting to see law and order be put inside of our spaces. How do you see us start to separate who we are as people? Like, oh, well, this person's a part of the safety patrol now, so they're going to look at themselves this way and treat the people around them in a certain way. Have you seen that kind of follow people as they've gotten older?
I don't know if the individual is actually aware of it as it's happening, right? I think that it's subconscious. Like, so for safety patrol, say, you would see that if you wore the sash, that, yeah, you got treated a little bit better, right? The Cub Scouts or the Boy Scouts, they got to go on trips. They were always doing something with an adult, usually a male. And if you didn't have an adult male in your house, you had somebody that could answer all these questions that you had, right? And so I would guess that maybe it's more conscious than subconscious.
Yeah.
And especially, like, imagine as a member of law enforcement and as a black man, being a police officer, I can legally carry a gun and nobody can do anything about it, right? You can't stop me. You can't say, show me this or show me that, or you shouldn't have that. I have permission, right? And so permission is freedom. At some point, we realize that we get closer to freedom.
Now, you're listening to the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Tia Graham. My guest is Khary Mason. He spent over 20 years in law enforcement and now works as an interdisciplinary artist based in Detroit. His newest exhibition is called Friendly Fire, and in it, he illustrates his complex relationship with police. It is on display at Irwin House Detroit now through March 5th. Now, I do want to get back to the portrayal of police officers in media. Now, you do have this TV on display in the exhibition that shows television shows about policing, and crime. Now, many of the ones that you show are throwbacks, but there are still so many crime police television shows today. Do you see a continuation of that in today's media when we talk about just the portrayal of police officers? How has it evolved?
I can say that the storytelling regarding policing evolves with technology. Mm-hmm. The new technologies, the emerging technologies that allow you to catch someone who has committed a crime appear in these shows oftentimes before local police departments actually have this technology, right? But what I wanted to get back to was as a latchkey kid, there were thousands, hundreds of thousands of us across the country that as we are watching these police shows, as I'm watching these police shows, and crack begins to decimate the landscape, it creates an army of little boys and little girls that will one day put on the badge. And they've had their teaching in law enforcement, their initial teaching from television, right? It seems like a good idea. It seems like they're telling you everything, but they're not. You are trained to follow orders. You don't question them. The camera taught me, my wife taught me to question everything. I remember asking a supervisor once, he had given an order, and I said, well, why do you do it this way? And his response was, we do it this way because that's the way we've always done it. He didn't question it, right? Hitler's soldiers in Nuremberg would say, we just followed orders. Well, that's not acceptable, right? And I think that it is very timely that the show is here in Detroit now, given what has been happening in Minneapolis with Mr. Peretti and Miss Good and so many people before them. Law enforcement that are not involved in these situations get on the phone and they talk about these situations, federal, state, and local. And the conversation goes something like this. What do you think about what happened, right? And the first thing that the officer who's responding is going to say is they're going to measure it against the reasonable officer standard, right? They're going to see if it was legal. Did the officer have permission to do what he or she did, right? The reasonable officer standard suggests that a reasonable officer would react the same way. That is the litmus test, right? Well, I don't think that we should do that. What if I replace the litmus test of the reasonable officer standard with your loved one? Mm. If at the end of the day, we put your loved one in that situation, would it still be okay? If it's not okay, then it's probably not right. It's probably not just. The law is often wrong, right? It used to be legal to own slaves, to beat them, to auction them, to breed them, to rape them, to lynch them. It used to be legal, right? It used to be legal to beat your wife. Tennessee versus Garner. It used to be legal to shoot a fleeing felon that was no danger to the community, right? The law is often wrong, right? Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should.
Now, Khary, you said that you thought you were going to fix the harm in your community. We're going back when you first joined in, you're 20 years old. And, you know, you wanted to see change within your community. You wanted to see improvement. So you become a police officer, but in doing so, you're arresting thousands of people that look like you. When you first started working in the police department in 98, what did you think it would be versus what it actually was?
Man, in 98, it was fun. It was football with no pads. Like, to be truthful,
Yeah.
that's what it was. Somebody wanted to fight, we fought. Somebody wanted to shoot, we shot. I got shot. I had permission to do what I did if you were breaking the law. And it wasn't until I would come home and I would say to my wife, Sadie, I would tell her what happened in the day. And she would say, no, y'all were wrong. Y'all could have done that another way. And
what was it like coming back to that moral compass, though, having someone there who kind of was able to balance out some of the things that you were saying and experiencing and doing?
In the moment, it angered me because she didn't do the job that I did. Okay. Nobody was trying to kill her. Mm-hmm. And this job was paying the bills. I couldn't hear what she was saying. Yeah. She sees far into the future, and it takes me a minute to catch up, right? But at a certain point, I began to realize that there are all these resources available for someone who's made a mistake, who's committed a crime, who's gone to prison, who's been released from prison. What if those resources, like when I was a kid in Latchkey, what if those resources were available to children in the beginning of their lives, before they made mistakes, before they broke the law, before they went to prison, right? Why is there such an industry wrapped around poor people going to prison, poor people being convicted, right? Why does this industry exist? And so in recent years, the Detroit Police Department has created something called the Brotherhood and Sisterhood. And I believe it's Commander Thurkill's baby. I don't know if it's still around, but I had a chance to participate in it before I left the Detroit Police Department. And so you would have guys and girls from Ceasefire and from the Detroit Police Department that would go to high schools and sit and have roundtable discussions with youth who had never been in trouble and just talk to them about life, right? Things that we didn't get when we were children. And I got so much joy out of that.
Yeah, just sitting down with police officers in a space where you aren't being put under the microscope, I guess you can say, or in a space where you can actually talk to them like they're the people that they are, the human beings that they are, Absolutely. That you all are. But I do want to go back to briefly before we do head to a quick break. You were talking just a little bit, once again, early on, you had this feeling of empowerment when you were out on the streets doing the things that the force told you that you were allowed to do. You're going home back to your wife and you're having these conversations and you're angry about her perspective. When you're out on the streets and you're doing this, you're having your conversations with your wife at that time. When were you starting to really think to yourself, maybe I am doing this the wrong way?
It was probably after my third life-altering moment on the job. It was about 2012, summer of 2012. My partner and I got into a fight with the family. It was mm-hmm. two grown brothers mm-hmm. and their mother. And I got disarmed, and my partner saved my life. That is when things started to shift for me. That is when I started paying attention. I had already been shot, right? I got shot in 2004. And I had, by this time, we had had our first daughter, right? She had been born the year before. But prior to that, it was just my two boys and my wife. And every time I've been in a life-altering incident on the job, I came back feeling like Superman, right? And I wanted to prepare my sons for the world the way it was, to survive the world the way it was. When my daughter was born, I wanted to change the world to protect them all. And so those things sort of intersected. That life-altering moment and the birth of my daughter allowed me to hear what my wife was saying.
I mean, we can go on and on about the power of having daughters, but we're going to get to a quick break right now. We will continue this conversation with Khary after the break. You all stay right there. We'll be right back. This is The Metro. the Metro. I'm Tia Graham. And before we continue, I want to give listeners a heads up before we start. Today's conversation may include references to violence and drug use, and we do recognize these topics can be difficult, especially for those with lived experience. So please listen at your own pace and take care of yourself. Khary Mason is a former police officer and detective of over 20 years. He joined the force to keep his community safe, but he eventually became critical of the work it does. An exhibition of images that depict his childhood influences, internal struggles, and revelations is on display at Irwin House Detroit until March 15th. Now, Khary, by the time you became a detective in 2014, the Black Lives Matter movement had begun. And that year, Eric Gardner and Michael Brown were killed, which sparked nearly a decade of police brutality protests. What was going through your mind at the time?
So, Eric Garner hit hard because I went to a seminar in another state on something called force science. And the person in charge of the seminar walked in and made light of the death of Eric Garner as an opening to all the police officers in attendance. And that was one of the most difficult weeks that I've experienced in a training. So Eric Garner hit hard, but George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor hit a lot harder, to the point that I became extremely vocal after George Floyd was killed. That was the first time I participated in a protest. My entire family, minus my eldest son, because he was in Florida, marched throughout the streets of Rochester Hills, and there were marches going on all over the country and around the world. But we also documented those protests, me and my son. And then Patrick Loyola got killed.
Grand Rapids.
And that was so tough for me. I was at the Attorney General's office at the time, and I spoke with Alan Langle and a couple other people on Deadline Detroit about the incident. It hit hard. Before I left the department, I was asked to serve a subpoena to a young man whose son will be on trial for murder. And the prosecutor wanted to use the father against the son because the son had confessed on a jail call to the murder to the father. The father owned a dispensary, but he also owned a very expensive house in another city. And because I lived in Rochester Hills, I knew what his reception in that other city was probably like. And I chose not to approach him at that house. I chose to approach him at his place of business. And the police are always in and out of dispensaries because of the crime that happens around those businesses, and they have really good surveillance systems. So I'm watching the door of the dispensary, and there's a young man with a blue and gray hooded sweatshirt on. And he's watching the door, and he has a pistol on his hip, and his sweatshirt is too short. And so he's tugging at the sweatshirt to keep it covered. And a lot of the dispensaries, they have a customer who has a CPL permit that never leaves because you aren't supposed to have firearms in the dispensary, right? And so I went in with my colleagues, and he was sitting all by himself, looking straight forward. He wasn't paying attention to me or the 20 other police officers that were in the business, and I knew that I needed to get as close as I could to him before I told him to put his hands up. When I got within arm's reach of him, I told him to put his hands on his head. One hand went up, and the other hand, that was furthest away from the police officers, went to the side where his pistol was. And I knew that all he was trying to do was cover his gun. But it looks like he's reaching for his gun. I grabbed both of his wrists and I begged him not to make me kill him. My partner disarmed him and opened the chamber, and wouldn't you know it, the chamber was empty. I cried all the way home. And I couldn't figure out why I was crying. I couldn't finish out my day at work. And that is the first time that I had permission to shoot somebody, and I didn't, right? That was the first time I had given someone the benefit of the doubt. And I wondered if my loved ones were in that position, being observed like that from afar, would they give my loved one that benefit if they made that same movement? And right after that, I ended up leaving the police department.
And that's kind of, it's all built in from the time when we see the Black Lives Matter protests, police brutality protests. It kind of just started to open you up to the point where you were able to see differently. You started to be observant in a way that you probably weren't before.
So, you know, was very interesting, and it's not just that. It begins with, my wife is the catalyst 15 or 20 years before, right? And I can't hear her in the moment. Yeah. My daughter is next. And after that, in 2015 and 2016, I go to college for creative studies for photography. I'd already had a camera in my hand to surveil my community. I didn't have a camera in my hand prior to that point to create art, right, and document the community. And CCS taught me to interrogate the world. It taught me to ask questions. And so when you look at a situation, you may see the same thing that somebody else sees. I see so much more because I'm constantly questioning what I see, right? I'm constantly questioning what is said. And some people take that as a challenge. I'm not challenging you. I need to know more. You haven't given me enough information so that I can make a decision, right? Yeah.
Bringing up CCS is the perfect way to segue to your artwork and the work that you've done and have on display right now at Irwin Gallery. But I do want to talk about how art has influenced your perception or the way you're viewing the world now, and how it's opened your eyes and quote unquote open your lens a little bit more as well. Can you talk about what art has done for you?
Man, CCS was tough because I was on the homicide task force. I could be called in day or night to a scene and I might be gone for 30 hours and I still got to go to school. I'll never forget, there's an instructor, his name is Cliff, and we were drawing large images of ourselves. They were self-portraits. And he said, you're going to spend hours upon hours upon hours drawing this piece. It is you. You know who you are. You know what you look like. But you might spend 3 hours on your nose. And in order to do that, you're probably 2 inches from the canvas. You have to back up. You have to get a bird's eye view to see where you've made a mistake. And so within the police department, because I started on patrol in uniform, and then I went to plain clothes, and then I worked undercover with the feds, and then I worked the homicide car. Before I was at homicide, I was chasing homicide suspects for 2 years all over the state, right? And then I get to homicide. I'm no longer on the street. People aren't trying to kill me anymore. I'm not running between the houses. I can see how we get moved around like chess pieces. I can see how this family is into it with this family, and they've been beefing for 40 years. I can see so much more because I now have a bird's eye view. I get a clearer picture, and I can make better decisions, right? That's what art taught me.
Going into the exhibit, zooming in and taking a deeper look in the photo in the photo Failure to Act, you show 3 images of yourself in handcuffs. It is a depiction of your feelings after George Floyd was killed. Why did you feel the need to illustrate your feelings in that way, especially after that moment?
So one of the great things that happened for me on the Detroit Police Department is that we had partners, or I will say I had partners throughout my career. I could check them and they could check me. If I was out of control, my partner would grab me. If my partner was out of control, I would grab my partner, right? We did that for each other. Detroit is far ahead of many other departments in this country with regard to pattern, practice, policy, procedure. But we don't teach on a national level. New York does, LA does, and other cities do, but we don't. We have a lot to offer.
Right there. What does that mean when you mean teach on a national level?
We do not instruct in our brand of law enforcement across the country. Other smaller departments do, other larger departments do, but we got our reps in. Yeah. We got our reps in the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, and very good policy was created to ensure that the mistakes of the past didn't follow us into the future. And so we are miles ahead of other police departments. We teach each other, but we don't teach abroad. Now, that may have changed since I left. Duty to intervene is incredibly important. And with regard to George Floyd, it is a response to what happened or what was done to George Floyd. After George Floyd was killed, I had a recurring nightmare. And in the nightmare, Darnella Frazier and everybody else tried to save George. They spoke to the police calmly, they yelled at the police, and they would eventually rush the police. And the police would always shoot the bystanders because they had permission, and they would get off. And it happened night after night after night. And then finally I realized the only person that could have saved George was another police officer. And so I created that piece.
The only person that could have stepped in at that time was another police officer.
Correct.
And it didn't happen.
It did not.
You have been very critical of the way police go about their work. The other side of that is that we need to have some sort of order. How do you balance needing order with the conduct you've experienced?
So I guess I can do it this way. Defund the police is framed very poorly. I live in Rochester Hills. You hardly ever see the police in Rochester Hills, but when you call them, they're there in less than 30 seconds. Education is great. Housing is plentiful. Whole food is plentiful. Health is plentiful. Employment is plentiful. During the day, you don't see kids out because they're in school. Now, when I come to Detroit, I see police cars everywhere. And education hasn't been great since I was a kid. It's better now. Employment isn't great. Whole food is not present unless you are dealing with Mark Covington or Malik Yakini and the others who are bringing Whole Foods into the community, right? And so there's a lot of stuff missing. And when those resources are missing, including the human resources that we remove, crime will be high. And I'll call the police, and the police will be too busy to help me, right? In a well-functioning society, you don't need that many police. You don't. Proof is across 8 Mile. And so it's not about defunding the police. And when you have less police, they get trained better. They get paid better, right? Everybody can't be the police, but we live in a society where they're telling you that everybody can.
Unpacking that just a little bit, from what I'm gleaming and understanding, Detroit has too many police officers on the streets.
I'm not necessarily saying that. Mm-hmm. I'm saying that when government functions well, when communities function well, you need less police. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're listening to The Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Tia Graham. My guest is Khary Mason. He spent over 20 years in law enforcement and now works as an interdisciplinary artist based in Detroit. His newest exhibition is called Friendly Fire, and in it, he illustrates his complex relationship with police. It is on display at Irwin House Detroit, and that's on display through March 15th. Excuse me. Now, When we talk about your exhibition, once again, you've been able to travel with your exhibition across a few places right now, across the state of Michigan. At least you've been in Mount Pleasant at Central Michigan. That's where you first debuted the exhibition. Now, when you first, dropped down in Mount Pleasant, you're debuting your exhibition. What were some of your thoughts and what was the feedback you were hoping to receive?
So the thoughts were just, I hope they come and see it.
Mm-hmm.
I hope they understand it. I was really nervous. And some of the feedback was from people who had been the police. They said, wow, this explains how I felt my entire career. Young people talking about the power in the exhibition, in the image, right? The response was surprising, and it was better than I could have hoped for. I'm sorry, I'm not usually at a loss for words, but you kind of caught me off guard.
No, because when you receive, especially when you were receiving some of the positive feedback or just that feedback of I feel seen when you hear from for police officers and your peers and your colleagues that you once worked with. What did it feel like to have that on display for people to feel seen?
Oh, it was one of the best feelings in the world. It'd probably take a second and third to, meeting my wife and my children being born. But it was, the response was more than I could have hoped for.
Did it feel validating? Did you finally feel as if, I'm not alone in this feeling, even though you possibly knew you weren't alone in this feeling that you were feeling, but did it feel validating?
So I can say that Friendly Fire was created as a love letter to the future superheroes that would one day pick up a badge and a uniform to explain to them questions they didn't even know they would have. These are the things that you need to know before you put the uniform on, right? It is my hope that these stories gain momentum and they allow other people to tell their truth, to explain, this is what happened to me, this is what I was used to do, or I had a great time as a police officer. But don't be silent. A lot of times, as veteran police officers, all of our friends are police officers. And if we speak out of turn or out of school, then we fear that we will lose our friend group in retirement. Well, I don't have a lot of friends. Most of my friends aren't the police. Some of my friends are police. Most of my friends are academics, artists, doctors, teachers, lawyers, photographers, journalists. And so I don't have like this small silo that I had when I was first on the job when my wife was saying, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, because all my friends were police. And if you all have a bad idea, who's going to tell you it's a bad idea, right? So, yeah.
We will continue our conversation with Khary Mason up next. You all stay right there. This is The Metro. You're listening to The Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Tia Graham, and my guest is Khary Mason. He spent over 20 years in law enforcement and now works as an interdisciplinary artist. His newest exhibition is called Friendly Fire. In it, he illustrates his complex relationship with police. It is on display at Irwin House Detroit now through March 15th. Now, Khary, as we take a little bit of a pivot here, we want to talk about who inspired your exhibition, but also who inspired you to take a leap of faith on yourself, creativity, and exploring the inner workings of the police department and law enforcement in general. You talked about Black women.
Absolutely. So I first want to say that Friendly Fire is an American story. It's a global story. It is for everyone. And at times you will hear me say Black or brown. It's because these stories come from my memory and my lived experience. But this is for everyone. My mentors, My mom is my first. She put me in a position to learn. She put me in a position to heal. And when I got to a certain age, when I got ornery and mannish, I met my wife at 14. By 16, she was my girlfriend. My mother's name is Marilee Beth. My wife's name is Sadra Denise. The next person is my sister, Naila Aisha. The next person after that is Satori Shakur, who taught me how to hold the attention of an audience and how to tell a story. Next is Claretha Peace Bell, who is an award-winning poet, my mentor, and has taught for our nonprofit, now shuttered, Capture and Belief, who taught me that if I just put the paper down, she just wanted me to memorize and have more of a stage presence. And last but not least in this list is Sabrina Nelson, who encouraged me to go to CCS.
Sabrina, all the names that you listed, including your mom, your wife, your sister, amazing folks within the media industry, but also within the arts community, have all influenced you and helped put you in alignment to meet the male mentors that would also help move you forward within this art community. So when we talk about your exhibition, what do you see next for it?
Well, in 2024, myself and my CCS classmate, Jalen Beatty, laid a voice track for an album along with a recording engineer named Ryan Cunningham. We sat with that for a minute, and I took the project to Bryce, Detroit. And I said, man, I need some help. There is something here. I need this to come to life. If anybody's listened to The Midnight Miracle with Dave Chappelle, Yassine Bey, and Talib Kweli, it's almost like watching television, but it's only sound. I wanted the album to be like that. And so Bryce introduced me to his childhood friend, who's a recording engineer and producer named Science. And over this summer, we sat in a very hot studio in Southfield, and we finished the album, and it is beautiful. You can only hear it if you come to the exhibition, or when we finish pressing up these 100 albums, you can get some vinyl, but there's only going to be 100. They're not for sale.
So how are people getting the albums?
I will give them to them.
Oh, you're going to have 100 printed and pressed. Yep. You're going to have them in your possession, and if you feel like it, you're going to give one out.
I'll give it out. Okay.
I'm hoping WDET is in this realm, because I know that this is the perfect space to showcase that work. Absolutely. So I'm hoping that we're going to get one of those press. A signed copy would be nice as well. But just as we get down and once again and wind up, I want to return back to the notion of safety and the idea that we don't really know what that is. Have you settled on a definition of what it feels like to be safe, or what safety should feel like?
Safety feels like hearing children playing in the yard, not having to look over your shoulder, not having to worry about if they're okay. Safety is sunlight on your face with your eyes closed, and you don't have to keep them open to look for danger. Safety is a warm breeze filled with the smell of lilacs that waft through the house as the sunlight heats the oak floors. Safety is love, but safety is also freedom. And I've been searching for that since I was a kid. When I find it, I'll let you know.
I was going to say, what lesson, or what is the lesson in your journey that you want folks to get out of your exhibition, especially when they're looking at your photography, but not just the photography, when they're looking at that clear glass case of all of your badges, from Boy Scouts all the way down to photos of yourself as a cadet, and all the way to photos of your family and loved ones. What do you hope that lesson is when we're looking at your journey and viewing what you've learned and lived?
Love everyone and question everything. I did want to say the closing celebration on the 15th, there will be a barbecue. There will be another listening session where you can hear the album, but you have to come on the 15th.
And when we once again talk about love, how do you do those things? You've lived a life that most people would not or could not get through. The things that you've seen in life, being a police officer, being on the force, love it comes from so many different places, but how do you do those things? How are you doing them?
So my wife is a very patient woman. Most of the police officers that I know that have done the job the way that I've done it, for as long as I've done it, have been married and divorced 2 and 3 times. Their children are grown. They live in another state. They don't know their grandchildren. My wife is patient. My wife is kind. One of the things other than her that's helped me get through everything is the ability to write down, analyze, question, interrogate, and turn into prose my lived experiences so that others can learn and they don't have to go through the same things that I went through.
And before I let you go, before we get out of here, Friendly Fire scenes on display right now at the Irwin House Detroit, and that's through March 15th. One more time about the closing ceremony that's happening March 15th.
Closing ceremony, March 15th. There will be a barbecue. Food will be while supplies last. And there's also going to be a listening party for the album.
All right, Khary Mason, I want to say thank you so much for joining us on the Metro today. Khary Mason is a photographer and multidisciplinary artist who spent over 20 years working in law enforcement. His newest exhibition is up right now on display at Irwin House Detroit. I want to make sure I get that right. And it is, one more time,
Friendly Fire.
All right, Khary, thank you so much. And I actually look forward to having you back on the Metro in the near future to just talk a little bit more about your involvement with law enforcement and your views of law and order right now in our country.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. You're listening to The Metro. And if you ever want to go back and listen to a conversation you heard on The Metro or share it with a friend, every conversation we have on the show is available on The Metro's podcast, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. You can follow, subscribe, and leave us a rating or a review. As well, we're always listening. Do you have any story tips or any ideas or maybe just some kind words for us? We'll take it all. Our email is metro@wdet.org. That is metro@wdet.org. Thank you for listening. This is The Metro and is produced by Sam Corey, Khary Jr. II, Robin Vincent, and me, Tia Graham. Our engineer is Jose Yanis. Our music's done by Sam Bobian, and our senior producer is David Lyons. The Metro is a production of WDET. It's a listener-supported service of Wayne State University, and this is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. You all have a great day.